Jason Davies here at Body Remastered with another YouTube video. Today we're going to be discussing where your fat likes to stay. So we're going to have a little bit of an in-depth look at fat, not just the fact that we should be trying to get to a body fat percentage that's healthy, but the importance of fat. Why fat is important in some areas and less important in others. Before we begin this, once again, please subscribe to our YouTube videos and go on to bodyremastered.com to check out the equivalent blog on where my fat likes to stay, and check out at the bottom of the YouTube video to find the equivalent blog at bodyremastered.com on where your fat likes to stay, and we give a little bit more information within the blogs. And then subscribe to Remastered Unlocked, and you can find some great materials. I think we have one on fat as well, which you can check out. So, talking about fat, I think it's no surprise that fat is an important biomarker for your overall health and longevity. I don't think that's a surprise. We talk about it all day. We talk about sometimes the problems with obesity, etc., etc. But I think what's less appreciated, and that's what we're going to touch on in this video, is one, the relationship between lean muscle mass and body fat. Also, how our workout regimes, we won't go into full detail on this blog, on this video, but we can check out more at bodyremastered.com and Remastered Unlocked, but how our workout regimes can affect how we lose or even gain fat and the speed in which we do those. And it's also very important to consider where the fat is stored, and why that's in some cases good, important, and why in some of the cases it's more detrimental. So we're going to be touching on all those things, because obviously there's a clear difference, sometimes we don't appreciate this, between dietary fat and stored fat, and we're going to touch on that. So let's get straight to understanding a little bit more about the importance of fat, because it's not all bad. Let's get straight to the importance of fat. It's actually critical. You need fat. And we're always talking about, the detrimental effects of having too much fat. What about the dangers of having too less fat? And sometimes we don't talk about that enough. When the body's too lean, and we don't advocate that here at Body Remastered. We want healthy body fat percentages, so that your muscles will functionally work with your fat, and you get the benefits of both worlds. So being too lean is not necessarily the right answer. Of course. Being lean it can be defined differently per person, and that's my point. If someone says to you, "Oh well, lean is this percentage body fat," it's just not true, because I think it's a bit of a misconception. The fact is, they don't know you as an individual. People store fat in different places, etc., etc. People with different genetics. It goes on forever. So it's for you to understand what's a healthy body fat percentage, but we'll cover that in more detail. But ultimately, fat regulates so many different things in the human body. It regulates your temperature. It actually provides a cushion for your bones and your internal organs. It plays a huge role in your immune system. And having too low a body fat percentage also creates an inability for you to absorb essential vitamins that need to combine with fat for the healthy functioning of cells. And of course, speaking of cells, fat is composed within cell membranes. So you need the fat, dietary fat, in your diet for your cell membranes. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to build, strengthen, and tone your body. It's as simple as that. Not only that, fat is a great energy source. It's a very efficient energy source. The body fat that you have gives you the energy not only for your workouts, but from day to day. It supplies energy even while you're at rest. And so obviously you need energy as part of your day-to-day activities. So please ignore anything you see that it's just not as simple as the more fat you eat, more fat you gain. It's just not that simple. Fat is such an complex and calorie-dense molecule that's essential and vital for all bodily functions, and that can vary from person to person as well. So, and you need fat as part of a healthy, balanced diet. We'll touch on that a little bit more. Let's just talk a little bit about fat and what happens once you ingest this. Once you ingest fat, the body begins to break it down. It does this through a process called lipolysis, so it will break out into two constituent substances, glycerol and fatty acids. because before it was a triglyceride, and it's broken down into its constituent parts. So obviously it breaks it down via an enzyme called lipase, but it also emulsifies via a substance called bile, so that it can be fat soluble, because it just doesn't mix. It's not soluble. It's insoluble at first, and of course we need it to be more soluble to get into the bloodstream. All of these processes just makes fat harder to break down. So it's a slower digesting substance compared to something like a carbohydrate. And sometimes, that's why sometimes fat feels more satiating. It feels like it's filled you up, which can also be a good thing, to make you feel less hungry or less likely to snack, just because of the complex processes of breaking the fat down. So once it's in the bloodstream, it goes to what I want to call a factory in your liver. Now when I'm talking about this, there's a lot of intercomplex other areas that are going on. So I'm only talking about it in a simplistic manner, just so I can cover parts of this video. So please, if you're a scientist, you know all about fat, please don't get mad at me for missing any other essential points out. I just want to show that, at the liver, one of the functions that the liver does is convert excess fat into a stored fat, which is known as adipose. And there's brown and white adipocyte cells. That's stored fat. So that's important to recognise straight away. There's a difference between dietary fat, the fat you're taking in through food, to stored fat, because the liver identifies the excess fat and it's putting it back into stored fat. Now, when it's stored fat, it's in the form of a triglyceride, so it's not broken down, and it holds an abundant amount of energy. As I said, it's good energy reserves for your body, which is very important, generally to have stored fat for energy. But we also now know that it's not just about this stored fat doesn't just have a role to play with storing energy. It also has a role to play with hormones and heat regulation as well, which unfortunately, if you build up too much excess body fat, you get what you call sometimes sick fat cells, which can have a negative impact on hormone production and inflammation of the body. Now, when adipose, that stored fat, builds up, it builds up into two locations. The first one is subcutaneous fat. Now, this is comprised about 90% of your fat around your body. This is soft, often visible just under the skin. It's the kind of fat you can pinch off your body. So that's subcutaneous fat. The other type of fat is visceral fat, which is composed of about 10% or maybe less of your overall body fat percentage. And this is deeper fat that tends to cover internal organs like your liver or your small intestine, etc. Your abdominal organs, I should say. And these tend to have more deleterious effects on an individual. They can release certain chemicals like cytokines or other chemicals that can increase insulin resistance, which is not what you want. So having more visceral fat is probably more dangerous than having more subcutaneous fat. So let's talk a little bit about fat and lean muscle mass. So we know that the body will use glucose as its first form of energy, which is derived from carbohydrates during your workout or exercise sessions. We also know that glycogen, which is stored in your muscles and your liver, will be used for your muscles. However, fat can also be broken down for energy for your exercises, broken down into fatty acids as part of getting the energy for your exercises. But of course, studies have shown that actually fat oxidation, breakdown of stored fat for energy, tends to take place more for endurance type exercises rather than short, intense exercises. So maybe HIIT workouts or even sometimes heavy lifting may not be the best way to lose body fat, because your body's going to be getting energy from other sources. But another way of looking at this, if you depleted all your all carbohydrates, so you didn't eat very much for a long time, and you maybe carried out your workout during a fasted period, then the chances are to get the energy for your workout when building strength and toning your muscles, your muscles are going to start taking energy, those glycogen reserves from the muscles, and therefore sometimes muscle breakdown can occur if you're not fueling the body. So I think there's a lot more to discover on this side in terms of, you know, what my body selects as energy ultimately, and there might be some types of exercises that are more preferential for losing stored fat as opposed to, you know, glucose available from carbohydrates or the essential glycogen reserves in your muscles. But what is definitely true, definitely an important factor, is that if you carry out weight training, you increase your overall lean muscle mass, it's going to help you continually burn more fat, more belly fat, more stored fat, because muscle burns more calories than fat does at rest. Muscle also contains, and we don't talk about this enough, glycoprotein insulin receptors, and this will improve your overall glucose metabolism, which is great, and you know, it will make sure you're using the glucose for efficiently. So you can truly get the best of both worlds if you're smart about the selection and the variation of your programming. So you include some aerobic, longer endurance work, so you potentially are using stored fat as energy directly. And like I said, making sure you're building and strengthening and toning your body, so you're building your muscle, your overall lean muscle mass, because you're going to increase your resting metabolic rate. So you're always going to be basically burning calories even while you're at rest. Muscles are great for that, more than fat is. And as I said, you're going to overall get better at, better at controlling your glucose within the body, preventing any bad chronic diseases like diabetes, etc. So let's next talk about where body fat, adipose fat, is stored. Now, men and women tend to store fat in different locations, and in fact, fat storage and accumulation of fat is highly dependent on hormones. We've all heard of that stubborn belly fat that never wants to leave us, right? It all comes down to the fact that fat has different receptors for different kinds of sex hormones. So on average, visceral fat, which I was telling you, that's the more deeper fat that covers our abdominal organs, tends to have more androgen receptors, for example, for testosterone, whereas subcutaneous fat tends to have more estrogen receptors, and this makes a big difference. Subcutaneous fat actually also produces and stores estrogen. So as a result of these receptors, men tend to have a high degree of belly fat because of the visceral fat that they have due to the high testosterone level and more receptors for testosterone for visceral fat. Whereas females tend to store more fat around their thighs and their buttocks because they have a high degree of subcutaneous fat. But of course, the distribution of fat storage around the body can change as we age, but also any changes in the level of hormones or different types of hormones as we age as well will go through different cycles, especially for women. So to sum it up, really, we don't have a huge influence on where our fat is stored, I'm afraid, unless you're going through hormone replacement therapy or changing your hormones artificially, or you're having surgery. The fact is, we're all individual, and males and females are different in terms of hormone levels. So, and it really does depend quite heavily in terms of fat storage on your different types of hormones, and just ultimately where they tend to store fat. Also, when we attempt to lose fat, we don't necessarily have a say on where the fat is lost first. In an ideal situation, spot reduction would work, but the fact is, the reality of the situation is that it just doesn't tend to be the case. A lot of it is based on genetics, and even that can change over time, and also metabolism differences. But we know that muscle mass can have a huge impact on your overall resting metabolism, which is great. But in fact, when we do actually lose fat, the fat cells, the stored fat cells, tend to shrink in size but the number of fat cells tends to remain about the same. And so that's why sometimes it's difficult. People lose weight, but they find it quite easy to put it back on to their original level. And that's where you've got to be careful. You know, some of the fat cells may reduce in size, but the natural number may stay relatively the same. So what does all this mean? Well, you know, at Body Remastered we say aerobic training should definitely be part of your programming. And we touched on this at Body Remastered, into building an effective training program to make sure you're losing the subcutaneous and the visceral fat. But building, strengthening and toning your body will have an even larger impact and must be included within your overall fitness regime. As I said previously, studies have shown that actually incorporating strength training into your workouts will have an even bigger impact than aerobic training on reducing overall fat, particularly visceral fat. So it's really important to incorporate it if losing body fat is a key goal of yours. But don't forget, as I said, body fat can be a source of energy for your workouts, where it will break down the triglycerides in your stored body fat into, you know, the constituent components, and even transfer it into glucose through a process called glucogenesis, where it will be used as energy. So that's part of it. But as I said, you know, your workouts are more primarily going to be using your available glucose from carbohydrates and your glycogen reserves as well within your muscles. So that's all for today. Thanks very much for watching our YouTube video. If you're subscribed to our channel, thanks very much. We've got lots more videos to come, different topics we talk about, but we'll listen to some of the comments in terms of any requests for comments, requests for certain topics to be discussed. Check out the equivalent blog at the bottom of this video. Please go on to bodyremastered.com where we touch on all topics related to building, strengthening and toning your body. We really want to help you to achieve that goal. So hopefully speak to you soon, and all the best.